this is part of the reason why now what you're seeing is this flight from the left to the right by young men. It's because the left has not provided in a way of being masculine in the world that is edifying for young men, and hasn't done it in over 20, 30 years, because the left has largely undermined the idea of masculinity, and that's associated with toxicity. And the moment you do that, image that they provided as the alternative, and this is part of the language in the conversation.
Today. I think we're going to do a great job.
What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to another episode of The Modern Man Podcast, where we are here to connect men in pursuit of their potential. Before we jump into the episode, I first want to encourage you to join us as we embrace discomfort, cultivate community, and put wind in each other's sails. And I'm excited to have my guest here today, who is an assistant professor in the School of Social Work at the University of North Carolina at Charlotte, with an affiliated faculty position in the Department of Africana Studies. He brings over 2 decades of experience in community organizing, social activism, and policy reform. His research focuses on racial institutional inequity, Black and white body politics, and the intersectional implications of race and gender in social work, education, and practice. It is my pleasure to have back on the show for a second time, Dr. Dante D. Bryant. Dr. Bryant, thank you for jumping on again.
Man, it's my pleasure, man.
So,
for sure.
As last time, I had you introduce yourself to the audience. Now that the audience probably saw part 1, they're watching part 2 now.
Okay.
They might be acquainted with you a little bit more, but my question will be, what's been new in your life since we last spoke?
I'm older than I was last time I talked to you. Other than that, man, it's kind of status quo. You know, I try to keep things as consistent as possible, and steady trying to move forward. That's about it.
Yeah. Stay moving forward and hey, hopefully wiser, older and wiser.
In theory.
In theory, we were talking a little bit before hitting record that sometimes the more you know, the more you realize you don't know. And that's the game a lot of us end up playing. But I wanted to piggyback off of our last conversation, and obviously we could take this anywhere from there, but we spoke a lot about our willingness, or the power of willingness and choice when it comes to personal growth, and how just the willingness of having a dog at the front door and then coming in the room can help expand your nervous system to being somebody who is not that afraid of dogs. Yeah. In the context of men and boys growing up into manhood, I wanted to discuss how sometimes the opposite, our unwillingness to develop, to grow, to become something different, can hinder us and maybe keep us at an immature level. So like I did last time, I'm keeping it broad, keeping it open to let you take it from there, but I'll give you the reins and see where that goes.
Well, I think the first thing that pops in my mind is the idea of motivation. Mm-hmm. Right. So, because willingness to do something that's difficult, you have to have a motivation to make you want to do it. Right? I say all the time that change is inevitable, but growth is optional. Yeah. And again, growth is the intentional willingness to move in a very particular direction by taking on responsibility. Like that's how that happens. And so, but there has to be something that motivates you to want to do that. And if there's no clear motivation, then why would you? Yeah. Right. Why would you actively go and take on responsibilities and burdens if there's no clear motivation for you? If you're not motivated, if you don't see anything that's meaningful on the other end of it. Mm-hmm. And I think that becomes part of the challenge. And it's funny. So I was having a conversation with a brother about 3 months ago about this. And we're talking about in the context of aesthetics, just how men dress. Right? And I was telling him, I said, one of the problems that we have is that we have an entire generation of men who literally dress the same way they did in their 20s. But now they're in their mid-30s, their 40s, and their 50s, but they still present physically in terms of their dress, their aesthetic, their mannerisms, as they did in their 20s. Mm. And this becomes problematic because if I'm in my 20s and I'm looking at an elder, an unk, or, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
OG, whatever term you want to use. And I'm looking at this person, and this person is 10, 15, 20 years older than me. Then ideally, I should be looking at something I could aspire to. But if he looks like me, if he dresses the way that I dress, if he uses the language that I use, then there's nothing for me to aspire to. So there's nothing for me to do. Right? So that you just undermine any type of motivation.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yeah. There's no difference between us.
No.
So what do I got to
change? I just keep doing what I'm currently doing. Right. And when I get older, I'll just be that. Right. Like I'll just be because I'm already there. Right. I think about I know growing up, my dad was in a fraternity, and I remember they would have chapter meetings at our home every once in a while. They would rotate different houses. And I remember being a kid and watching these men get out of their cars and walking up to the house. And they were in dark suits, trench coats, top hats, you know what I mean? And they'll walk, and it'd be like 15, 20, 30 of them, and they would come into the house, have their briefcases. And I remember looking at their stature, the way they moved, the way they would dress, the way they carried themselves, and thinking to myself, oh, that's what men look like.
Yeah.
Right? So it became something for me. And that was a contrast to me who's over there in gym shorts, a sweatshirt, and tennis shoes. And so there's a clear distinction between who they were and who I was. And so what ends up happening in those moments is you make the association to adult masculinity or manhood is a certain type of aesthetic, is a certain way of being in the world. And we don't really provide that at this point. So I think what ends up happening in a lot of ways, we just undermine young men's motivation. It's like, what else? What is there for them to strive towards?
Yeah.
Unless you give them something.
So would that be the role model's fault? Would it be the men who've grown up and now have taken the mantle? I guess it begs the question, where did the handoff get fumbled?
I think it's a cultural issue. I think we live in a culture that primarily emphasizes and pushes the idea that the best time in your life, the peak of your existence, is 2025. Right? And then once you hit that, it's downhill.
Yeah.
Right. And I think so what ends up happening is young men grow up, they hit their peak, and then they spend the rest of their lives trying to hold on to it.
For dear life.
Exactly. And which is unfortunate because now you're 35, but you're still functioning like you did when you were 25, and you haven't established anything new. So there's nothing for you to be proud of at 35.
Yeah.
Because you were busy trying to hold on. Instead of building for tomorrow, you were trying to hold on to yesterday. And so now you're 35 years old, and there's nothing in your life that reflects that you've made significant progress. And so what you do is you double down. And then another 10 years goes by, and now you're 45. And you're regretting getting older because you're like, the older you get, the more you're reminded of what you haven't invested in the future.
Yeah.
Like, it's interesting. Like, I've had a conversation with several brothers of mine who I know, and most of them are in their mid 40s, some of them pushing up on 50. And a lot of them don't want to get older. They have anxiety about turning 50, or they have anxiety about turning 45.
Yeah.
And I'm like, well, where's the anxiety coming from? Like, what is the anxiety that you're having? And really what it comes down to is they've spent their time from 25 to 45 trying to hold on to being 25.
Yeah.
And so there's nothing for them to stand on at 45. There's nothing for them to stand on at 50 that differentiates them from who they were at 25 because they haven't built anything. Right? And so I think a lot of it is a cultural piece. Right? And it varies from culture to culture for sure. But I think in the West, we have this fixation with youth.
Yeah.
And once you've lost it, that's it.
Yeah.
So.
Oh, the best years of your life.
Yeah, the best years of life are over.
Yeah. Make all your mistakes in your 20s and all that.
Yeah.
While the outward appearance might change for those who go through 35, 40, preparing for the future.
Yeah.
What is it that's happening on the inside that sparks that outward change in appearance? What is the aesthetic a reflection of?
Something that they see. Right. Human beings are designed to aim at stuff.
Yeah.
Like that's just how we're wired. We need something to aim at. And by default, if we see something worthy, right? It's talking before, like the idea of attention.
Mm-hmm.
If we see something that's worthy of our attention and we aim at it, that becomes the medium by which we use to organize ourselves and our behaviors. I'm trying to get there,
Mm-hmm.
right? And once you decide, always some people try to work backwards, figure out where you're going, and that will dictate everything else. Whether it comes down to mate selection, doesn't really matter. Once you figure out where you're going, that makes a lot of your decisions for you. Because if I know that I'm about to take a trip to Georgia, I know I'm not going west from here.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
I know I'm not going to pass through Oklahoma. I know I'm not going to pass through Texas. I'm in North Carolina. So if I'm going straight to Georgia, I'm trying to get there as fast, efficiently as possible, then there's a lot of places by default I've deselected.
Mm-hmm.
And so it makes the decisions easier. And so I think what's happening is what happens internally for those who, I think the physical manifestation is a byproduct of an internal decision to aim at something very specific, which then reduces the number of decisions that they have to make, which then helps to streamline their life, their effort, and their energy. And that ideally manifests in how they carry themselves. That's the ideal. But you also have people who just perform. Right. And so what do you do with that?
Yeah.
Because you're going to always have those who attempt to mimic the work and the effort that it takes to get somewhere, or that they've already gotten there. They will attempt to mimic that in an effort to acquire at least the short-term benefits of that journey.
Yeah.
If that makes sense.
Yeah. I think what comes to mind in our last conversation, you mentioned our most precious commodity, not just our time, but the attention.
Yes.
What we put our attention to.
Yeah.
And for those that are performing, the loudest voice tends to pull the most attention. And I don't know if you see the same where you talk about the cultural aspect of it. There's a lot of boisterous depictions of older men that I think has become, for some younger men, the aim, which to your point of that performing and how authentic is that depiction really could cause that perpetuated cycle of I followed that image, got it, wasn't all that, but now someone else is following me as I was pursuing that image.
So when you say boisterous images of older men, what do you mean? Give me an example of that.
Well, for a lot of us, whether it be I'll say the Ashton Hall trend. I don't know if you're familiar with it. The guy, no shirt, he's got the mouth tape and he's just showing his day, right? Social media attention.
Okay.
But I could see how with the millions of followers that he has everybody else copying that trend, now people are dipping their face in bowls of ice water, which my wife's like, that's kind of a fancy exfoliant type thing, or open up the pores, but he's rubbing the banana on his face. And that's the funny aspect, because my wife's an esthetician. I'm like, babe, what's the point of rubbing a banana on your face? She's like, that's just gross. But you have people all over the internet who are rubbing on a banana on their face for skin health, right? So that's just, I guess, a surface example of how the depiction of one person on what would look on the outward side something desirable for young men to get after. Dude's driving a G-Wagon, he's jacked,
he has all the
he's got all that,
all the accoutrements.
So I'm going to do what he does. I'm rubbing a banana on my face too.
No, I mean, so that's part of the problem. That's one of the many issues we have with social media, right? Because if you think traditionally, you as an individual don't get to determine when you become a man.
Mm-hmm.
Other men decide once you become a man, but that requires a community. So other men have to sign off on you. That's traditionally how cultures have functioned. Social media kind of pulls all that apart, because now there is no validation that's needed. All you need is response, right? So it's like, if I get because you don't have to actually do anything. You just have to look the part. And it's for a 30-second clip a 2-minute reel, whatever it may be. You just have to look the part. And if you have the accoutrements and you look the part, you'll get the attention. If you get the attention, as that attention grows, people automatically assume that what they're looking at is valid because other people have signed off on it. Right?
Social proof. Yeah.
Social proof. And so now we have, oh, this is what a man is supposed to look like. And it's like, and we know this because he has all the accoutrements, right? And he has the validation of everyone else who's also following him. In cases, and you see the same thing in communities sometimes. So to your point, I think about the flashiness, and I mean, I don't really know what to say about that, to be honest with you. I think it's very difficult to convince a young man that that's not an ideal, right? Particularly in our current culture, because what are his other alternatives? No, like seriously, like what are the alternatives?
Yeah. I mean, there's some I look up to, but probably not as.
But what is the culture attractive you as an alternative?
Culturally,
because Ashton, because that's the guy, the muscle guy.
Yeah.
Okay. So the culture of social media has lifted him up as an option.
Correct.
Right. So my question is, what options has current Western culture lifted up as alternatives to that?
Yeah, I get what you're saying.
You see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Not you personally, what you went out and found, but what is the culture itself? Western culture, U.S. Western culture specifically, lifted up as an alternative to that. And to be honest with you, this is part of the challenge and part of the reason this has nothing to do with what we're talking about. Well, it does.
Sure.
This is part of the reason why now what you're seeing is this flight from the left to the right by young men. It's because the left has not provided in a way of being masculine in the world that is edifying for young men.
Yeah.
It hasn't done it. And hasn't done it in over 20, 30 years. Because the left has largely undermined the idea of masculinity and that's associated with toxicity. And the moment you do that, right, the image that they provided as the alternative, and this is part of the language in the conversation. Well, if you are competitive, aggressive, assertive as a male, you are toxic. So what we need to do is you need to be more like young girls. You need to be more passive. You know what I mean? Whatever it may be, right? And so we socialize young boys to be more like young girls and tell them that everything that's natural to them is wrong. And the moment you do that, now you've suppressed the very nature of their being. And someone like Ashton, is that his name, Ashton?
Yeah.
Someone like Ashton becomes a viable option. What was the other guy? Andrew Tate?
Yeah.
Andrew Tate becomes a viable option because what other options do you have?
Yeah.
Right? Men like my grandfather, even my father, you remove them off the table. Like it's interesting, like my dad is educated man, former Black Panther, all the things, right? Always been active in the community, has raised more children than he's given birth to, right? He's been a father to entire communities. And I've watched him over the years withdraw because he's recognizing, he's in his 70s now, right? He's recognizing that the form of masculinity in which he embodies that has carried his community, that has served his community, that has served his family, that has served the nation. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
This type of masculinity has been frowned upon for the last 15, 20 years. And he sees that, right? And so he's pulled back. And I've watched his peers do the same thing. And these are the Black men from the civil rights movement. These are you know what I mean? That's what these men are.
Yeah.
And they've pulled back because who they are has been labeled part of the toxic narrative.
They're part of the problem.
They're part of the problem.
So they retreat.
And so you pull those men out, you remove those men from the table. And now what you have is a vacuum and you haven't replaced it with anything that's viable. And so Ashton, Andrew Tate come along and they become viable options for embodying masculinity in the world. And so it's like, and then social media lifts them up as such. right?
Yeah.
So for me, the question that becomes, well, what alternatives does a culture provide? Like, you'd be hard pressed to find an image of a man in our current culture prior to the Trump administration. Like, let's be clear.
Yeah.
This last term, you'd be hard pressed to find an image of men that's been lifted up, that's actually edifying to men.
Yeah. No, that's true.
That's probably the reason why Jordan Peterson took off the way that he did.
Mm-hmm.
Right? It's because he actually came in and said, listen, it's actually okay to be these things. Matter of fact, you should pursue these things with restraint, right?
Correct. Yeah.
It's probably why he took off. His initial audience was all males. His initial audience, right? But he was an alternative. He was a way of being that allowed young boys to grow and to evolve into their masculinity, right? So, yeah, I mean, it's our culture. Our culture's it's in trouble.
Yeah.
Right. It is. But again, you see the flight over to the Conservative Party, and not because they have necessarily a better definition of masculinity, but they have one.
They have something.
And it's problematic. It's funny. I was talking to somebody about this the other day. If you look at the definition of masculinity on the left, right, it's non-existent.
Yeah.
They literally don't have one. Like, even now, they still don't have an identity of masculinity. Think about it. Like,
I can't think of.
The Democratic Party has not produced a definition of masculinity that's viable for young men. They still have not done it. And so young men are leaving, and they're leaving in droves, and they're going over to the Republican Party. The Republican Party has produced a definition of masculinity, but the problem is it's antiquated.
Say more.
So it's a definition of masculinity that draws on tradition.
Yeah.
Right? Mm-hmm. The male as the sole and primary provider, protector, so forth and so on, right? The problem is that, and this is in some respects an unintended consequence of the feminist movement, in the fact that women entering the workforce. Because the moment women entered the workforce, what you got was you had the government had twice as many people it could tax. Mm-hmm. Right? And you also had, along with that, you had a rise in income per household because it doubled, literally.
Yeah.
Like overnight. Right? So the government can tax more people, so the government can acquire more money, and corporations can produce at a faster rate because there's more people working. Mm-hmm. Right? No one wants to lose that. But unintended consequence was price of living goes up. Okay.
Yeah.
So, and now it went from the feminist, it went from women having the option to work to women having to work.
Yeah.
Because right now in our current economy, it's very difficult, extremely difficult to sustain a one-person working household. And for most people, it's not even an option.
Yeah.
Right? Most people, two parties have to work.
Yeah, it's not a conversation. We can't do it.
Can't do it. Right. And so, but if you look at the idea of masculinity that's being produced by the Republican Party, it's based on an old model. And it's based on the model of the male being that person, the sole provider and protector of the family.
Yeah.
And it hasn't been updated.
If iron sharpens iron, so does one man sharpen another. But if you're a man and you're alone or listening to this, then who sharpens you? What's going on, guys? Ted Phaeton here, host of the Modern Man Podcast, also founder of the Noble Knights Mastermind Group. And I'm just out here encouraging you to find your circle. Maybe you're on a personal growth journey and nobody around you understands the new mentality that you're possessing. That's okay. You can find an online community that will pour into you, will navigate your goals and navigate your obstacles, share their experiences, resources, and more. Join the Noble Knights Mastermind Group and try us out for free to tap into a community of men helping each other scale up and reach their goals.
Check out themodernmanpodcast.com.
So going back to that model,
in
essence, could put you in a position where you're trying to implement a square peg in a round hole because
it's just not going to work because there's different negotiations that need to take place.
Correct.
Right. So, because if you're in a dual household income, that's a different type of negotiation that you have to have in terms of, okay, how do we allocate responsibilities in the home? Because you don't have one person who's dedicated to the home and one person who's dedicated to providing for the home.
Mm-hmm.
That's the traditional model, quote unquote, right? That's not even a traditional model. Like that's a model that existed after the Industrial Revolution. That's pretty much it. Prior to that, males and females always had to work, right? They had different labor markets. Women were in textiles, men were in whatever, you know what I mean? But nonetheless. So you have this dichotomy. It's like, okay, well, you take care of stuff in the house. I'll take care of all the stuff that provides for the house, right? I'll get the bacon, you cook it, that kind of dynamic.
That's it. Yeah.
But now both of you are getting bacon because you have to in order for you to eat. So now when you get home, now you have to renegotiate these responsibilities because both of you are just now getting home.
Correct.
Right? And so if masculinity is solely predicated on the idea, it's like, well, no, I'm the one who brings the bacon and you cook it. If it's solely predicated on that, if that's the linchpin, but now we're both out here getting bacon, we're going to have a problem when we get home because now you're pulling double duty and I'm not.
Mm-hmm.
You see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So now we have to renegotiate who does the dishes, who cleans the floor, who's going to change the diaper, right? Mm-hmm. All of these everyday family activities need to be renegotiated, but they have to be renegotiated in a way that can still maintain a sense, that can still support a healthy identities of masculinity and femininity. That's the challenge. And the Republican Party doesn't provide that either, but at least it provides a model.
Correct.
Right? Democrats have provided nothing.
Yeah.
Like you can't even point into the party and point at something like that's it.
Yeah.
That's the definition of masculinity.
I would say to the old model.
Which is crazy.
Yeah. I mean, I've seen some folks do the old model in today's society, and that's for some people who've been well off.
Yeah.
They make enough or they take some sacrifices and they do more of that traditional approach.
Yeah.
Without the new model, you have a lot of guys who are, to your point, white knuckling a new setup that doesn't kind of fit like a new suit. Maybe the arms are a little too big or the shoulders are oversized. And I think of two sides, right? The appetite for the new model of masculinity. There's clearly an appetite for it.
Yeah.
And then you have the current model that the right's presenting that a lot of men are fleeing to.
Yeah.
Some might find success in, and with social media, you know, it's the small minority that shouts louder than the silent majority. But for those examples, whether it is the Ashton Halls or the other ones that social puts up, that becomes the North Star for so many people.
Yeah.
Back to the aesthetics, right?
Yeah.
I already know the answer for me personally would be the responsibility on the person, but how do you approach something like that on a grand scale? We could say on this podcast, the responsibility is on the man to look up the better example or craft your own. But on a societal broad spectrum, do you feed the appetite or do you cook up a new recipe?
You have to cook. The thing is, it is on the individual, but it's also on the society.
Okay.
And the reason why I say that is because masculinity is socially dependent. Like it's fundamentally socially dependent.
Mm-hmm.
What we define as you and I talked about this before, right? Is as a man, you have to create social value. You're not born with it. When you're born with potential.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. In order for you to become valuable to your society, you have to produce something that your society values.
Sick.
Hard stop. In order for you to be considered valuable, you have to produce something that your society deems valuable. Period. And the more valuable society deems it, the more valuable you become. And then you become an asset. But you have to develop that. You have to develop that skill. However you do that, you have that. Okay? That development of social value is what is associated with the masculinity, is your ability to contribute to the society something that it needs. Okay. That is kind of the foundation of your masculinity. That's going to change from environment to environment, from society to society. So in any given culture, any given point in time, the definition of masculinity will change depending on the needs of the community.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Now, I will say this. What you typically see historically is whatever that is usually associated with risk. Right?
Heck yeah. I see that a lot. I see that a lot.
It's usually associated with risk. But that said, it's like, so when you think about it like that, it's like, yes, the onus is on the individual for sure. But the society has to provide a model. It has to, because you can't create an identity out of thin air. Identities have to be socially validated. They have to be. That's what makes them social identities.
Yeah.
Is that they are socially constructed. Right. Yeah. It's a give and take between me and you as a larger community, because I can self-identify as whatever, but if you don't acknowledge it as such, then it doesn't exist.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
This was part of the problem with the gender identity movement. This is part of the challenge they ran into. It's like, yeah, you can self-identify. You have the right to self-identify however you see fit. But unless the larger community acknowledges you as such, the identity doesn't exist. Like, I don't exist. Yeah. I cannot prove my existence without bumping into other people. Like, so I need people to affirm my existence as a human being, right? For me to experience being a human being.
What is it? They have the objective truths, the subjective truths, and the intersubjective truths. We all agree.
Shared subjectivity. It's true. Right. And so,
correct.
If the community's defining masculinity over here, and I'm defining it over here, I'm not going to be recognizable to them as masculine or as a man. I'm not going to be. So there has to be a conversation or negotiation between the two of us. Right. And so that's what I mean by it's socially dependent. That what it means to be a productive and contributory man of a society is going to depend on what that society needs. Period. And so if the society's job, part of its job is to provide that model for that population. And unfortunately, if you do not provide them with a healthy model, they will self-destruct. That's what will happen. Which is what we're seeing now, right? With like the flight of men from marriage, the flight of men from the work environment, flight of men from education. It's like, we don't have anything to aim at. So we're just we're going to go over here. And what's funny is like, we're actually lucky, to be honest with you, that, like the proverbial joke about he lives in his mother's basement. It's like, you really ought to hope he stays there. Honestly speaking, because if he comes out, he's going to be destructive.
So with the lack of a clear example, men will be self-destructive and they'll retreat. And you say it's best for them to stay in their mama's basement because if they come out, that could be destructive. How? Because
we need things to aim at, right?
Yeah.
Like, as human beings, we need things to aim at. And I think if you don't provide young males with the proper outlets and guidance, what they do naturally will cause them to self-destruct. Right. So, for instance, when young males hit puberty, they tend to increase in disagreeableness, become more disagreeable. Okay. And off the bat, you're like, oh, you're disagreeable. That's a problem. It's like, well, yeah, in certain contexts it is. But at the same time is that you don't want someone, unless you are disagreeable, you will not stand up against tyranny. You will not fight back against oppression.
Yeah.
You will not fight back against bullies. Like, what's required to do that is to be disagreeable. It's required. Otherwise, you cannot stand up for yourself. And so you need this, particularly in the population that has been identified also as the population that is most expendable.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
If they're not willing to go fight, then we have no means of protection, or we've reduced our means of protection at the very least. All right. So you want men to have a level of disagreeableness, but you also want to have to train them when to be disagreeable, which means you have to provide them with a framework in which to engage in that disagreeableness. Same thing with aggression. You don't want a society of passive men. You don't. What are you going to do with that?
Nothing.
Exactly. Right? You need men to be aggressive. You need men to be disagreeable. You need men to be capable of violence. You need them to have all of these capacities, which we tend to start developing after puberty.
Yeah.
Right? If properly socialized, then you're good. If improperly socialized, you're going to have a problem.
Mm-hmm.
But it's the thing. Socialization is based on models. That's all it is. It's a system. It's the affirmation of certain words or the reinforcement of certain ways of being in the world.
Mm-hmm.
And the kind of trying to limit people's deviation from that.
Yeah.
Right. So it's like, listen, you're competitive, you're aggressive, you're hardworking. This is what you need to do. Do this over here. Right. It's the same reason why, like, it's interesting. Like, if you look at the sociopaths, right? Usually about between 3 to 5% of the U.S. population at any given point in time. This is globally, right?
Mm-hmm.
And be like, oh, I guess sociopaths. Yes, but you need sociopaths, right? And they're overrepresented in certain professions.
Really?
Yeah. Right. And some of those professions are surgeons, corporate attorneys, special forces in the military.
I can see that.
Right.
Yeah.
It's like, there's certain dispositions that disposition can be completely self-destructive. It can destroy the entire society.
Yeah.
Right? Let's be clear about that.
Yeah.
It can destroy the entire society. But if properly socialized and channeled, it becomes a force of good. And that's the thing. And so you have to give young men, you have to give them frameworks that they can operate in to exercise their natural capacities.
Yeah.
Because if you limit anything's ability to engage its natural capacity, I don't care what it is, it can be a plant. It's going to die. Like, that's what it's going to do.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? And so, unfortunately, I think as a society, we have not, at least over the last 30 or 40 years, we have not provided a model or a framework or a way of being or a pattern of being for young men to engage in that will allow them to do what they do naturally in a way that's contributory to the larger society.
Yeah.
We have not done that. And yeah. And unfortunately, we have social media now, right?
Mm-hmm.
So seriously, like,
and that perpetuates it even more.
Yeah, because
the
now,
lack thereof.
It's like anybody who's shiny enough becomes the example.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And it's like, but the person who would be willing to do that in the first place is probably not the person you'd want to follow. Not in real life.
Yeah. Not in real life at all. To your point of the sociopath and the positive application, I mean, we've had our last in virtual conference, we've had former Navy SEAL on. And he looked me in the eye with a big smile. And he's like, my wife lets me do what I love. And that's killing bad people.
Yeah.
And I'm like, okay, you say what you love to do is go kill people. Now, in this context, you're serving our country and you've got 23 years in the Navy and we thank you for your service.
Yeah.
If that person's doing it independent,
that's a problem.
It's a huge problem.
It's a huge problem.
Yeah.
So it's like, how do you channel the natural instincts of various populations and people?
Yeah.
Right. And unfortunately, we have largely, at least over, like I said, 20, 30 years, you can probably go back a little further than that. We haven't, half of our population, we've largely just been like, hey, listen, you all step down.
Mm-hmm.
And indefinitely. Stop participating the way you were previously participating indefinitely. I say, okay, because it's problematic. And you might be right about that. That's fair. Let's just say that you are. Say you're 100% right. How I was participating prior to this time was completely detrimental to the other half of the population. Fair enough. Cool. What is my alternative?
Yeah.
And again, no one can seem to tell me what the viable alternative has been.
Yeah.
Right. And we're seeing it now. Like, we're seeing the effects of it now. And
I think of the pendulum swinging. You know, oftentimes when things need to be corrected, we overcorrect.
Yeah.
And it seems as though, and I would say this a lot when I was a guest on podcasts and they talk about toxic masculinity and my perception of it. I would conclude it then as, you know, it's almost as though we are afraid of strength in men because it's been used in a negative way.
Yeah.
However, there's the opposite side of, there's been a lot of times in my personal experience, and I imagine on a societal level and a major scale, perhaps hasn't been highlighted enough, of the same strong men checking other men.
Well, I would say that that's more of the, I had this conversation with some of my students earlier in the year. And they were saying that, and one of the arguments I thought was an interesting argument. She said, well, men have to protect us from other men. Right? That's why. She said, that's her fear of men at baseline. Right? And
Okay.
so men are typically protecting you from other men. And I was like, okay, let's go with that. Let's
go there. Yeah.
Let's go with that. And my question then becomes, well, my observation then becomes, then by and large, you're doing a pretty good job. Like, honestly speaking, because you move about in the world, right, assuming that you're safe.
Yeah.
Right? Most of the time we move about the world assuming that we're safe, that we're okay. Right? You can only make that assumption, right, when violence is not consistently being done to you.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right. So there's something to be said. Like, I think all in all, yes, I think in our current society, I think do people suffer at the hands of men? Yes. People suffer at the hands of other people? Yes. Right. Is it catastrophic? Yes. Is it too many? Yes. But at the same time, my wife can go to work, go do her job, and come back home. And statistically speaking, she's largely safe. She feels comfortable getting in her car, driving down the street, going to her job, and coming back home. Right? So there's something is working. Does that make sense?
It does. Can I play devil's advocate?
Yeah.
Would that be the lack of masculinity? The reduced strength, if you would, over time?
You could argue that, but the problem you're going to run into is that then all it takes is one. Right? If you have no men who are willing to stand up, then all it takes is one man to overthrow them all. Right? Just one bully.
Yeah.
Right? Which is interesting because that's part of the argument that the left has been giving towards Trump. Honestly speaking, right? He's a bully.
Yeah.
There's no one to stand up to him. And it's like, well, if there's a bully in the room and there's a reduction in masculinity, then who can stop the bully?
You want that.
The bully becomes, he becomes the oppressor. Like, that's how it works.
Yeah.
Because you're going to always have a portion of your population, roughly 3 to 5%, right? Who are willing to take out anybody. Seriously. Right? And so you have to have men, that's what we talked about before. You have to have men who are capable of violence to stop men who are willing to engage in violence. Right? And not just men, but women too.
Yeah.
I mean, like, let's be clear about that. Like, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
If you're the average female, then half the women can kill you. Like, that's how that works. Like,
that is true. Yeah.
You know what I mean? The environment, right? Like, and that's the thing too, is like, we think about these things all only within like our current social context. It's like, no, this is an evolutionary process, right? Modern civilization is listed like what, 2,000-3,000 years, arguably 5,000 years, right? Human beings as Homo sapiens have existed for what, 300 million years, something ridiculous like that.
Yeah.
It's like, yeah, we haven't been here that long. We haven't had homes with safeguards and electricity that long. Like, let's be clear about that.
It's all new.
This is new.
We're figuring it out.
Yeah, I mean,
little by little.
These are new things. And so it's like, okay, well, what was going on with human beings prior to? Well, we were largely confronted by the environment. That's who we were confronted by, right? And the environment was the biggest threat. And other groups of people were the biggest threat, right? And so, I don't know.
Do you think we go from a thought process of survival to all we've known is a certain comfort in life that isn't purely survival, right? Does that allow different structures, different images of masculinity to come forward? Because now it's no longer, you mentioned risk, right? Now it's no longer send the men off to war, send them on the ships over the horizon, see what happens.
No, for sure. Every time you make an environment more safe, you change the dynamics of the relationships between men and women by default. Like, the safer the environment gets, the more those, and likewise the other direction, right? We saw it in Ukraine.
Yeah.
when Ukraine, what a lot of people don't realize, Ukraine was, prior to the war, Ukraine had one of the fastest growing feminist movements in the world. And then the war hit and it stopped. Fundamentally stopped. You heard nothing else about it.
Why?
Since then. Nothing.
Yeah.
Like literally one of the fastest growing feminist movements in the world was happening in Ukraine prior to the start of the war. The moment the war hit, it was like women and children out. All men, you stay and fight.
Yeah.
You heard nothing from the feminist movement. The social dynamics changed.
Completely. Yeah. There's a new problem. There's a new threat.
It changes the relationships. Conversely, the more safe an environment gets, the more predictable an environment gets, because safety and predictability typically go somewhat hand in hand.
Mm-hmm.
It also changes those dynamics between men and women. And they have to renegotiate what it means. And largely, you're renegotiating what it means to be masculine.
Mm-hmm.
That's usually what the society has. That's why I said it's part of a society's job to provide those frameworks.
Yeah. What now?
Yeah. Like,
right.
Okay, what are this group of this population supposed to be doing now?
Yeah.
Like, what is there for them to do now that helps to contribute, right?
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of the work that men do is unacknowledged work. It's infrastructure work.
I was going to kind of give a wrap up as we come towards the end of, in terms of the lack of an example or a framework for someone to work off of, for any of the men who are listening, wanting to craft their own definition of masculinity on their own. What tips, advice?
They can't.
They can't.
No. They can't do it.
They need society.
You got to be in service to something.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? Like,
what would you urge someone watching to be in service to?
Family, community. All right. I would say, try to find a way. Look around and see where there's a problem. Whether it's in your family, whether it's in your community, whether it's in the larger society, find a problem and then try to solve it.
Amen.
And try to do your best to solve it while causing the least amount of harm. I think if you pursue that as a man, and as a young male, and you pursue that, you will evolve. You know what I mean? Into a man, like, by default.
Yeah.
Because eventually you have to become, in attempts to solve a problem, you have to become the type of man who could solve it. Right? That's just how it works.
Yeah.
So I would say find a problem and try your best to solve it while doing the least amount of harm to people. And let that be your guide.
Amen.
Yeah.
Where can folks find you, connect with you, follow some of your research, some of your work? What are the best sources and areas for them to go?
Actually, I have no idea. I would just say, you can always email me.
Yeah.
At dante.bryant@charlotte.edu.
Mm-hmm.
And that's pretty much it. Yeah. I have an Instagram page.
I'll have that IG, your email in the show notes, and everything to connect people to you.
Yeah, that's pretty much it.
Last question. Usually the heaviest, but I feel like we talk some pretty heavy topics the whole time. What is something you've seen or something that's happened to you that shapes the way you view the world as a man?
I would have to say, watching my father in service to the people around him. My dad has dedicated his life to serving the people in his home, in our broader family, and into the larger community. And I think seeing that and the consistency of it, the vigilance and intensity in which he does it, I think that's pretty much it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Amen. Assistant professor in the School of Social Work at the University of North Carolina at Charlotte, with an affiliated faculty position in the Department of Africana Studies, Dr. Dante D. Bryant. Thank you so much for being on the show today.
Man, it's my pleasure, man.
Yeah,
my pleasure.
Great chopping it up. I'm going to really quick wrap up some of the notes that you took. I stopped taking notes because I was just trying to be just engaged in the conversation, but change is inevitable. Growth is optional. A lot of us are dealing with a world that's ever changing, but if you're not changing with it, if you're not growing with it, if you're not paying attention to society, finding out how your fruits can contribute, you're going to be left behind. Manhood is a certain type of aesthetic. What aesthetic are you prescribing to? What are you seeing on social media? What is society putting in front of you as the aesthetic of manhood? Are you pursuing it, or are you pursuing something different? Figure out where you want to go to help make decisions. When you know the end game, when you know where you're headed, you can get clarity of what not to do. And as a man, you have to create social value. What does society need? How are you going to contribute to it? And as Dr. Bryant said, while harming as little people as possible. Social and individual work together. You can't have one without the other, and you need to be disagreeable. We need men that are strong. We need men that are disagreeable to stand up to the tyrant, to stand up to those who overstretch or abuse their power and their authority, as long as you have discernment in your behavior. And of course, as always, how are you contributing to your family, to those who depend on you, for those who rely on you? And how are you bettering yourself to become the person capable of solving those problems? Guys, as always, thank you for making it to the end. Be sure to give love to Dr. Dante Bryant. Hit that like button, hit that subscribe button, and share this with somebody else. And of course, be sure to check back next week for another episode, as we always provide these each and every single Friday. With that being said, thanks for making it to the end. And as we always say, everybody wants the sunshine, but they don't want the rain. But you can't get the pleasure without first the pain. Let's grow.